Hello everyone and welcome to this year's Research Reveals here at the State Library of Queensland. I'm Jenny Woodward from ABC Brisbane and Queensland and I'm delighted to be your host today. Hello. Now, for more than 40 years, I have been at the weather maps. I know it's a ridiculously long time, but I have seen it all: cyclones, wild storms, giant hail, tornadoes, floods, heat waves, even snow. Yes, snow in Queensland. And of course, the impact of some of those big events are documented here at the State Library, so future generations can look back, see what happened, and then analyse the outcomes. In 2022, I hosted the announcement of the Queensland Memory Awards, and today we are going to see what the winners have been doing over the past 12 months and what they've discovered with their research. I was intrigued by the topics and I can't wait to hear their reports. Before we start, I would like to respectfully acknowledge the traditional owners of the lands on which we are meeting today and pay my respects to elders past and present. And I extend that respect to elders and First Nations people who are joining us here today. I would like to acknowledge and thank donors to the Queensland Library Foundation who joined us today, and in particular, any President's Circle supporters in the audience. The Queensland Library Foundation supports the work of State Library by raising funds to inspire and connect more people through knowledge, storytelling and creativity. Now, research fellowships are the key areas supported by the Foundation, and the fellowships create new knowledge from the State Library's collections, sharing, recording and expanding Queensland's diverse stories and history. If you'd like to make a tax-deductible donation to support the State Library's Research Fellowship or the other Foundation-supported initiatives, please take a brochure on your way out this morning and check out the Queensland Library Foundation website or speak to some of their staff members who are here today. I would also like to welcome past Queensland Memory Fellows in the audience today, as well as the current 2024 fellowship cohort, and they have just started the research on their projects. It's an incredible chance to delve into the amazing historical treasures that are stored in the State Library's vaults. Now, as you entered the auditorium today, you'll have seen the slideshow that's up on the screen, and that shows the outcomes of some of the past State Library fellowships. Sadly, one of our fellows can't make it today. Last year's Monica Clare Research Fellow, Dr. Max Brighty, is unable to attend because he's in Boston pursuing a prestigious scholarship at Harvard University on Indigenous philosophy and history. Sounds pretty amazing, doesn't it? Dr. Brighty's State Library research project, Mipa Mani, the colonisation of Kalali country in southwest Queensland, aims to provide a unique perspective grounded in truth-telling and Indigenous philosophy. Now, we're missing him today, but we do eagerly await Max's return in the latter part of this year when there'll be a special session to find out what he has been doing at a special Research Reveals event. So we wish Max every success at Harvard and look forward to, no doubt, his fascinating presentation that's coming up. Now to some housekeeping. I'm sorry, but we always have to do this. Today's event is going to be videoed and photographed, so if you have any concerns about that, please let one of the library staff know. And after the event, the recording of each talk is going to be made available on the library's website, on Vimeo and YouTube channels, as well as added to the catalogue for future researchers. And if you do need to go out of the auditorium during a presentation, if you could go up the backstairs and make your way out there, that would be great, as it will minimise disruption to our speakers. If you need to use the bathroom, we've got some on this level, just right across the hallway over there, and there's also some upstairs. So, how is today going to happen? Let me give you a bit of a rundown on how it's all going to unfold. Research Reveals is an annual event by the State Library showcasing the outcomes of the previous year's Queensland Memory Fellows. And we've got an exciting lineup of presentations today that cover a diverse range of topics. Now, these individuals have spent a year delving into the State Library collections, unearthing new historical insights about people, places and events that have shaped our state. Now, we've got 3 sessions today. There's this morning session, an afternoon session, and then a late afternoon session, which will be a very special jazz performance on the Queensland Terrace, which is just outside, inspired by Brisbane's iconic Primitive Cafe. More on that soon. Now we're going to hear from 3 speakers in each of the morning and afternoon sessions. They're going to talk for about 20-25 minutes, tell us about their work, and then we're going to have a question and answer session after that. Now, instead of using a microphone roaming around, we're going to use some technology called Slido to field the questions. So if you haven't used Slido before, I've done a practice run. It's pretty easy. So we've got the QR code up on the screen. All you do is open your camera and just put that into the lens. A little yellow box pops up. You just click on that and that takes you to Slido. You don't have to sign up or do anything like that. Just write your question in and then it pops up on my screen down here after it has been moderated. The library staff will be doing that, and then we'll be asking questions of the panel based on your questions. So we're really hoping that you will get your phones out. Feel free to scan that right now so that you can ask questions and we can find out more about their projects. It sounds complicated, trust me, it's not. It's really simple. I did it before and it was easy as. We would love you to share your reflections of today's event by using the hashtag SLQ Research Reveals. That's all one word, and you can use it on your favourite social media platform. At 12:30, we're going to stop for a 90-minute lunch break, and then you can get a bite to eat at one of the cafes or somewhere around the Cultural Centre precinct. But there is also a special white gloves experience, which is being held in the Marcia Souris and James C. Souris AM White Gloves Room, which is up on level 4. Now, we've got a limit on the group numbers. They're quite large, but only 40 people per session. So if you want to go, just make sure you sign up so that we get you into a group. You'll be up there for about 20 minutes and you'll be able to see all of some amazing things that have been curated by our fellows today, and it comes of course from the John Oxley Library collections. So these are items that are relevant to the projects we're going to hear about today. You can put on some white gloves and take an opportunity to see what our fellows have been looking at during their research time with the library. And you can get up to level 4. There are lifts down here, and I think there are also stairs here just outside the auditorium, depending on how you're feeling. And of course, if you want to visit the library shop today, there is a special deal for everybody who's here at Research Reveals. They have got a fabulous stand showcasing publications by past library fellows. And best of all, there is a 10% discount if you are here today. All you have to do is let them know at the checkout and you'll get that 10% off. So happy shopping. Now, for those of you staying for the full program, don't miss the finale. It is a talk and an exclusive jazz performance by Letty Katz fellow Dr. Leah Cotterill, inspired by the iconic Brisbane coffee house, the Primitive Cafe. Oh, how I wish I had been there. It's a hub of modern jazz in the 1950s in Brisbane. Now, the Primitive played a pivotal role in shaping the careers of jazz musicians during that time, especially when Brisbane was considered very parochial and socially conservative. It was a vibrant and influential spot, attracting a diverse crowd of artists, musicians, and contributing significantly to our city's cultural sense. So there'll be some light refreshments available. Excuse me, you can grab a drink and let yourself be transported back to that time. The closest I think I'm going to get, and it's not an experience I want to miss out on, so I hope that you'll join us for that. Of course, the State Library is located on Kurilpa Point, which is a historically significant place for gathering and sharing for First Nations peoples. Now, we continue this tradition today and acknowledge the land's rich heritage of story and knowledge. Let's start the day acknowledging our First Nations histories and cultures with a big welcome to country from Uncle Stephen Coghill, followed by an address from State Librarian and CEO Vicky McDonald. Please welcome Uncle Steve and Vicky to speak.
Well, good morning, everybody. How are we all feeling? Bit cooler today? and certainly inside of here. So I just want to acknowledge the elders and the not-so-elders, all those knowledge holders. I'm very honoured to be here this morning to present this Welcome to Country. Come in. So, good morning everyone, and let me acknowledge the State Library Queensland for hosting and organising the Research Reveals event. Research Reveals, it sounds like the name of a good book or a movie. But yeah, I would like to also take this opportunity to acknowledge the researchers and their efforts and the contributions in this year's events. I'd like to congratulate the organisers of this event for acknowledging and honouring protocols of Aboriginal people with a welcome to country. Thank you. I'm very pleased to provide this welcome this morning, today, on behalf of the Yuggera people, who I'm a part of, who I'm a people of. I understand this event is significant in the State Library's Queensland strategic approach to recording and preserving Queensland history, as well as promoting awareness of Aboriginal Torres Strait Islander people history through the Monica Clare Research Fellowship. I understand this event is a holistic approach that includes developing the community and the organisations awareness of not only the history of Queensland and Australia, but also research methods that are respectful and sensitive, and that builds people's understanding and capacity to entertain tolerance in today's society. We think, as a Yuggera person, I acknowledge that this Kurilpa Point this place was often frequented by Aboriginal people, First Nations people, Yuggera people, and continued to do so and does so. This place where we're on now used to have a boarding house here. There was a boarding house right in this complex, and a lot of Aboriginal people stayed at that boarding house, including my auntie, my mother's sister. So I remember this place with fond memories of visiting my auntie and things like, and our cousins who lived there as well, and they liked living here as well. So I just thought I'd share that with you. In the same way, our Yuggera people also continue to seek and achieve good outcomes in our quest for recognition and genuine representation, both politically, economically, and culturally. We believe that good faith is a foundation of working together. Goodwill and righteousness bring us together in cooperations that so no one is left out or left behind. Through genuine alignment with these principles, we believe that change can be made to our society. Good change. A wise man once said, when righteous people are in authority, the community rejoices. So having righteous people in place is an ongoing effort, not only for Indigenous people, but for everyone. Every 4 years, we have people come out and say how brilliant and fantastic they are and what they're going to do for us. And then, sometimes it doesn't work out that way. That's all right, you've got to learn to roll with the flow. So as custodians, stewards of this country, we continue in promoting and advocating for change that brings trust and good faith and responsibility. We are continually seeking opportunities to make our suburbs, our country, our nation a safer place, a better place for our children, all our children to grow up in. We look forward to a future that's inclusive of everyone, of all peoples, and that accommodates all people's cultures and circumstances in a meaningful and positive way. My connection to this country is through my great-great-grandfather. He was born just over the river there between the Customs House and the GPO. That was a birthing place back there for women, obviously. He was a significant member of the Yuggera people in southeast Queensland, and he lived and worked in southeast Queensland. He worked for Petrie. He worked down here. He had descendants. So that through that connection, that's given us the custodial stewardship of this country, and we intend to be that to be a benefit for all Australians, all Queenslanders. So I'd just like to say some words now in Yuggera, and then I'll interpret it back into English for you, just in case you don't speak Yuggera. I say that at a lot of welcomes, and people always laugh about it. So if you heard it before, thanks for your polite laughter. Yawa Yuangun, Karamba Biran Nagambli, Balkana Yuggera Jarana, Karamba Naguru Nagambli, Balka Nagamli Yuggera Jarana. And that means, hello friends, it's a friendly greeting. Good day to you all. Greetings from our Yuggera country. Great Spirit, God bless you all. Greetings all on Yuggera country, to our Yuggera country. So let me extend that warm greeting in Yuggera country. Let your stay here be healthy, safe and prosperous, and thank you very much.
So, Gambadaru, Gambanani Gyanadu, which is good day. It's good to see you in Burragum, which is the traditional language of the community that I grew up on the Darling Downs. Good morning, everybody. My name is Vicky McDonald, and it's my great privilege to be the State Librarian and CEO here at the State Library of Queensland. And on behalf of my colleagues, I welcome you today to Research Reveals. I'd also like to begin by acknowledging Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples and their continuing connection to land and as custodians of stories for millennia. We're certainly inspired by that tradition in our work to share and preserve Queensland's memory for future generations. And that's particularly what today is all about, is sharing the history of Queensland. I'd also like to thank Uncle Steve for his welcome to us this morning as well. I also would like to extend a very warm welcome to our MC, Jenny Woodward, OAM. And congratulations, Jenny, on receiving your Medal of the Order. So Debbie received the Medal of the Order of Australia, as you probably know, in the Australia Day Awards just recently as well. I also welcome Debbie Best, who's the Chair of the Library Board of Queensland, Lisa and Jodie Suganto, who are supporting the Monica Clare Research Fellowship through the Suganto Foundation, Sally Malik, who is supporting the Letty Katz Fellowship, and Ken Tritton and his family. And I'd also really like to extend a really warm welcome to our fellows, who are the stars of today, and it's terrific to have you here and to hear about the work that you've been doing over the last year, but also to welcome all the previous fellows. You saw the slides as you arrived, and there's so many of our previous fellows in the audience today I saw as they arrived, so welcome to you as well. I'd also like to thank the Queensland Library Foundation and their donors and supporters and sponsors. Without their generous sponsorship and support of these awards through the Queensland Memory Awards, this research would not be a reality. So State Library opened the John Oxley Library in 1934, and it was named after Surveyor General for the colony of New South Wales. 200 years ago, the Englishman was on a mission to find a suitable site for a penal settlement that could house convicts it deemed the worst of the worst. On the 3rd of December 1823, Oxley wrote in his field notebook, "Calm and sultry. We passed a miserable night. Mosquitoes, spelt with a U, and sandflies almost devoured us. At 5:30, resumed the expedition of the river." I'm sure we can all sympathise with Oxley on the flies and the mosquitoes, but not much has changed there in the last 200 years. But in terms of our understanding of history, we have certainly made great strides. As a cultural institution of influence, it is our privilege to preserve and make accessible these primary source documents. We can also contextualise this fascinating colonial commentary with other voices. Voices that may have been ignored or dismissed at that time. This is truth-telling at its most fundamental. We all view reality through the prism of our own backgrounds, experiences and imperatives. So the notion of truth-telling should not cause trepidation. It should be embraced as an opportunity. Oxley's reality was very different from the Aboriginal people he saw on the banks of the river he was once said to have discovered. but they may well have agreed on the state of the fly and mosquito populations. The John Oxley Library and its rare collection items provide us with the opportunity to add to and interrogate events of the past in new and exciting ways. Not through erasure, but through nuance. Thoughtful research that honours the multitude of perspectives that combine to provide a true representation of our history. The Queensland Memory Awards allow us to invest in this important endeavour. In 2004, State Library established this John Oxley Library Fellowship. From that single fellowship, the awards program this year has grown to 7 fellowships and 3 awards, totalling $110,000 of stipends. The additional fellowships focus on historically underrepresented areas. This research is helping to honour and elevate the stories of women, First Nations people, the queer community in respectful and truthful ways. 80 unique historical research programs have been completed over the life of the awards program. And as I mentioned, you've seen some of those profiled this morning. New stories have been told and collections have been created and added to the State Library's archives. History should never be seen as static or linear. The 2024 research projects are captivating as always. They include Queensland musicians, the rich history of Asian Australian eateries, First Nations value systems, and the illustrious history of a prominent shoemaking company. You can stay updated on all these amazing projects on the John Oxley Library blog on our State Library website. If you are inspired by today's fellows, you might also consider applying for the next round of grants and fellowships. You do not have to be a history professor to apply. Previous State Library Fellows have included retirees, local historians, writers, artists, photographers, and even a school bus driver. All you need is an interest in history and a good application pitching your research project. State Library will be taking applications from July, so keep an eye on our website and social media channels for information. Of course, State Library's resources are for everyone. Visit our research webpage for more information, tools and resources that can help you to start your own research journey, or talk to the librarians at the John Oxley Library desk on level 4. You might also like to learn more about our Colonial Secretaries Correspondence Project. With over 16,000 copies of letters relating to the colony of Moreton Bay, this invaluable resource will help you shed light on our colonial beginnings and provide further information. I really do hope that you enjoy this year's research program, and Jenny's already outlined it for you today as well, and learn something new about our state's history of the stories behind some of the unique collections that are held in our collections here at the State Library. So I do really hope you enjoy the day, and we'll see you during the day as well. So thank you.
Thanks so much, Vicky, and certainly Oxley got it right with the sultry conditions. I think we're all very familiar with those after the summer that we have had. But I guess people's minds might be worrying now, thinking, what topic could I research and, what grant could I apply for? So I hope you're thinking about that as well. But now it is time to take a journey through time and introduce our first researcher who's going to share her discoveries and enrich our understanding of our shared history. Our first speaker this morning is Greer Townsend. Now, Greer is the 2022 Mittelhauser Scholar in Residence. This fellowship was generously supported by Dr. Catherine Mittelhauser AM and designed to attract leading thinkers who develop new ideas, tools and strategies that develop galleries, that benefit galleries, libraries, archives and the museum sector. Greer's project, I Feel You, Discovering Collections Through Emotion, delves into emotional resonance found in the archival materials, aiming to uncover the profound and personal connections people might establish with the State Library's diverse collections. Please welcome Greer to the stage.
Thank you, Jenny. So, hi everybody. I acknowledge the traditional owners of the land on which we gather and pay respect to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander elders past and present, and to all First Nations people here today. Please be aware that this presentation contains images of deceased persons. I would like to thank the State Library Foundation, and especially Dr. Catherine Middlehauser, for this incredible opportunity to spend a year diving into such nourishing material. I Feel You, Discovering Collections Through Emotion, explores curating collection searches by emotion. The outcome of this project will be a non-traditional search catalogue, a standalone website featuring bespoke pages for each emotion. The idea is that to explore Queensland's diverse history in the State Library, I Feel You users will simply need a feeling. So this morning, I'm going to take you on an emotional roller coaster. But firstly, I'd like to ask, how are you feeling today? Try to think of 2 to 3 words to describe how you're feeling right now as we look over this image by Gabrielle Morgan from Peel Island. Have you ever wondered what your emotions or your interior world might look like? Could they perhaps look like this? Mysterious, beautiful, ever-moving, ever-changing, a perfectly imperfect bouquet of feeling. I've been thinking about this over the past year. How can we pair together story and image from disparate parts of the State Library's collection to build up a picture of what an emotion has looked and felt like across time, space, and culture, and how could that help us? Emotional granularity, being able to describe emotion with great specificity, allows us to better understand ourselves and others while improving our well-being. Applied to the categorization of our collections, it could enable us to view history through a deeply human lens. While we may never know exactly how someone in the past felt, we can still make out a soft shape of what was from which to rebuild a story, sometimes from just a single sentence. I have just read your letters again and I feel I can never be grateful enough for them, wrote prisoner of war Maurice Delprat to his sister during World War I, expressing gratitude, love, homesickness, loneliness, desperation and grief, perhaps the most complex of emotions. His words encapsulate sentiments expressed across the vast, deeply moving Delprat collection. Maurice was separated from family for almost 5 years, fighting for his survival and grieving a former life. What if an isolated retiree read Maurice's letters? Could he find strength in this soldier's courage? Could a natural disaster survivor or a displaced person do the same? Could you? Finding mirrors of our emotions in other people's stories can be a powerful form of connection. But how do we find Maurice's story? Catalogue searches in Queensland's GLAM sector and beyond are not traditionally configured to account for emotion. However, over the last 2 decades, research on the history of emotion has revealed a captivating window into the past. From the tender to the turbulent, emotions shape our lives. They can affect our mind, body, behaviour, and decision-making. At a societal level, they can foreshadow, take centre stage, or trail a moment in history for decades, or even centuries, through revolution, war, religion, and intergenerational trauma. History and emotion are inherently intertwined. However, untangling emotional nuance and its historical or contemporary implications can be challenging, especially when making categorical distinctions. In considering the ethics of ascribing emotions to people of the past, historian of emotion Katie Barclay notes that we need to consider how, what, and why people have recorded their emotions. For example, what can a smile mean? Here we can see what looks like a happy, carefree couple smiling at each other. In fact, a wife is saying goodbye to her husband as he leaves for war, not knowing if they'll ever see each other again. And here, 2 people with almost identical expressions, yet would we describe their emotions differently based on gender, age, culture, time, and place? And why? So where do our emotions come from? Throughout history, emotion has been attributed to supernatural forces, automatic bodily responses, evolutionary processes, the psyche, and the subconscious. Anthropological studies have revealed the emergence and disappearance of emotions across time and discovered culture-specific feelings, while philosophers have long debated which emotions, if any, are our collective core suite. Despite these ambiguities, emotion is at the core of human experience and is documented, albeit sometimes implicitly, throughout our collections. So how can we articulate our emotion using language? A critical idea for historians of emotion is that our feelings are shaped by the language that we use to describe them, according to Berkeley. The word emotion only came into use as we know it in 1830 from the French émotion, meaning movement or motion. Before that, we experienced things like passions, accidents of the soul, and moral sentiments. In The Human History of Emotion, Richard Firth Godbehere notes that we might all feel similar things, but the way we understand and express those feelings changes from time to time and from culture to culture. So there are words for emotions in English and in other languages that we may not know, although we may have experienced the feeling. Here we can extend our emotional granularity and explore some beautiful emotion words and definitions using the collections. Let's see if any of those 2 to 3 words for emotions of yours come up here. The German Runenlust, feeling irresistibly drawn to crumbling buildings and abandoned places, is a good one for librarians, I thought. Nyctodonia, the feeling of excitement or elation that comes from anticipating success, like when you know your favourite sports team is just about to win. Or when you realise you've timed your jump perfectly with the sprinkler this time. This little guy looks exactly like my dog too. Basorexia, the sudden urge to kiss someone. Or the Japanese koi no yokan, the feeling upon first meeting someone that you will inevitably fall in love with them. This is different to love at first sight. This is a premonition of love. The Italian dolce far niente, the pleasure of doing nothing. And we would all like to do more of that. Now this one's a little darker, the French l'appel du vide, meaning the call of the void. It describes the disturbing, fleeting impulse to jump off a cliff or perform a similarly fatal act, making us feel that we can't trust our own instincts. Tiffany Watt-Smith suggests that this is where our fear of heights come from, not a fear that we will fall, but that we will jump. The Russian toska describes a dull ache of the soul or insatiable searching. Homesickness. We're all familiar with homesickness, but what if this definition, a feeling of longing for one's home during a period of absence from it, doesn't fully encompass how we feel? Perhaps we can look to other languages to be more granular, like the Welsh hiraeth, the homesickness for a home to which you cannot return, a home which maybe never was, the nostalgia, the yearning, the grief for the lost places of your past. Or the Portuguese saudade, a melancholic yearning for someone or something that is far away or lost. These emotions articulate more specific loss, a missed opportunity, mourning your younger days, or the engulfing loss of being displaced, losing your home, losing your country. 2 stories in the collection may encompass these emotions. In an internment camp in Victoria, 1941, German-born Jewish linguist William Lorenz Reineck held in his hands an unopened letter marked with 2 brutal words, address unknown. He had sent it to his mother in Germany to let her know that he had been forced to depart England. Wilhelm would later discover his mother's property, once the family home, had been seized by the Nazis, and that his mother had been deported to a Jewish ghetto in Minsk, where she soon died. Decades later, and an ocean away, Lim Kim Vang, a young Buddhist, silhouetted by moonlight and carrying little more than his English dictionary, fled into the Cambodian jungle in a bid to cross the Thai border and escape the infamous Khmer Rouge regime, 1975 to 79, ruling his homeland. The dictionary he carried was not only key to a new life, it also put his life at great risk. Photographer Kim Hack, who created this image, stated, "Books were banned during the regime. If a soldier or spy caught someone reading, the person was declared educated and immediately executed." Emotions, like flowers, usually appear in a cluster. Fear, for example, can be accompanied by hope, panic, dread, worry, anxiety, paranoia, and more. It can morph into phobias or become contagious. It can grow from within or be projected onto us. Let's look at 3 different versions of fear in the collections. Maurice Sendak's book, Where the Wild Things Are, 1963, almost wasn't published. After first seeing the monstrous creatures, editor Ursula Nordstrom feared parental backlash. She later wrote Sendak explaining, "It's always the adults we must contend with." They sift their reactions through their own adult experiences. As an editor who stands between the creative artist and the creative child, I am constantly terrified that I will react as a dull adult. Nordstrom's fears were realised. The book was condemned for being too dark and immediately banned in the southern states of America, as well as in libraries nationwide, for supposedly depicting witchcraft and the supernatural. Yet her courage was also rewarded. Where the Wild Things Are is now one of the most beloved children's books of all time, selling tens of millions of copies in over 30 languages. Sendak himself was never fearful, believing disruptive emotions like fear and anxiety were part of children's everyday lives, and that it is through fantasy that children achieve catharsis. One young reader even wrote to him asking, "How much does it cost to get to where the wild things are?" If it's not too expensive, my sister and I would like to spend the summer there. Some fear, however, isn't imagined. Like the sudden vice-like grip of terror, fear's ultimate level, one of few emotions so all-consuming it stands alone, found here in the spine-chilling words of 2011 flood survivor Lisa Spielring. "I was at home with 3 of our children when the water struck." She continues, "Within minutes the children noticed there was a wave coming at us from the west covering the rail line. We had no choice now but to run towards Sandy Creek to the east, which we knew was already flooded. People were floating past us on the roofs of cars, and houses were tipping over with people screaming for help at the windows. The noise was deafening. I had my youngest daughter Isla on my back, and she kept saying to me, 'You won't let me drown, will you, Mummy?' Fear isn't always as sharply defined. Sometimes it's insidious, man-made, and used as a deliberate and political act of control. In Fear, An Alternative History of the World, Robert Peckham suggests that fear's power lies precisely in its murkiness, ambiguity, and durability as an emotion, behaviour, idea, and tool. In an excerpt from The World is Watching, a short documentary produced to expose racism in Australia and mobilise support for planned protest activities at the 1982 Brisbane Commonwealth Games, Cheryl Buchanan, a Gwarmu Nation elder and lifetime campaigner for social justice, reflects on this version of fear.
People become really frightened to say anything because if they start speaking out, and it's been shown time and time again, that they'll say, "Oh, well, if you're going to start talking out, you're just going to have to leave here, you know. You can move with your family." Or under the laws of the Act, they can just, move a whole family to another area, to another reserve. And it builds up not just a fear, I think it's worse than that, because it makes our own people apathetic, where they don't want to think about anything because they're too frightened that if they start thinking about anything, someone's going to come down on them.
Let's now have a look at a few examples of how a single emotion has been experienced and interpreted in Queensland over the last century and a half. Loneliness, an emotion that very much came into the spotlight during the enforced social isolation of COVID, yet has also been of concern for some time, so much so that in 2018, the United Kingdom appointed the world's first Minister for Loneliness, and in early 2021, Japan followed suit. We get on board. However, Ending Loneliness Australia's 2023 State of the Nation report revealed that almost 1 in 3 Australians feel lonely, with 1 in 6 experiencing severe loneliness. More complex yet, 1 in 3 feel ashamed by this feeling, with 1 in 2 concealing the way they feel. So let's talk about it today. It's just you and me here, after all. In me, there is a vast and lonely place where none, not even you, have walked in sight. A wide, still veil of solitude and light, begins Love Sonnet 49 by Brisbane-born poet Zora Cross, 1890 to 1964. Coveted by homesick First World War soldiers and their bereft lovers alike, Cross's emotion-laden book, Songs of Love and Life, published in 1917, was a sellout. Lauded for depicting emotion as a multifaceted living thing, Cross's poetry became best known for unflinching portrayals of erotic love. Yet the work also speaks to the inverse of togetherness, loneliness. Love Sonnet 49 posits that in essence we are all alone, and concludes by underscoring the hidden beauty of solitude. She writes, "And when from there I come to you, love swift, my mouth hot edged with kisses fresh as wine, often I find your longings all asleep, and unresponsive from my grasp you drift. Ah, love, you too seek solitude like mine, and soul from soul the secret seems to keep." In Western society, loneliness as a negative emotion didn't exist before 1800 and is closely linked to modernity and the rise of the individual, according to Faye Bound-Alberti, author of A Biography of Loneliness. Alberti suggests gender, ethnicity, religion, and socio-economic status all contribute to how we experience the emotion, and that we fear loneliness because of how we frame it. Early 19th century romanticists would have applauded Zora Cross's reverence for seclusion. While viewed as problematic today, until 1850, loneliness, or oneliness without the L, was considered crucial to spiritual discovery, allowing for communication with nature and with God. A posthumous lecture on the melancholic British-born Australian poet Adam Gordon Lindsay, 1833 to 1870, declared that he loved the wild, free life of the bush. For him, that life had no loneliness, for nature and he held close and sweet communion with each other. Yet Lindsay's relationship with nature was double-edged. In his poem Sunlight on the Sea, 1867, nature's ephemerality is presented as painful, gradual loss, with each verse tracking the sun's slow disappearance. I miss the voice of one I've heard, Lindsay writes. The sunlight sinks upon the sea. He continues, I miss the face of one I loved. The sunlight settles on the sea, and so on. Feeling alone on a crowded boat, he wrestles with the complex loneliness, missing someone he knows he shouldn't. Similarly, communication with an ever-present God was not an antidote to loneliness for Fanny Trundle, a pious British woman who migrated to Queensland with her husband and 13 children in 1849. Despite having a large family, a happy marriage, many friends, and a zealous commitment to God, Trundle's sumptuous ink-filled diary, spanning over a decade, records persistent feelings of loneliness and anxiety. Trundle's experience of loneliness was later exacerbated by an empty nest, widowhood, and an increasingly complex relationship with God. Being alone so much is not good for me, Trundle wrote as she ruminated over her troubled adult son. I hope God takes interest in my affairs. I crave sympathy, but alas, the world has little for me. She later continues, how lonely and how little understood even by the dearest. I wish I could feel greater trust in God in seasons of severe mental suffering. Trundle's feelings reflect the contemporary changing definition of loneliness. From the mid-19th century, as religion lost favour and industrialism reigned, Victorians reinterpreted the emotion to encompass a great sadness said to be instigated by closed-door city living. This is a woodcut of Brisbane in 1870. This loneliness remains a focus in Australia today, where increasingly high-density living has been shown to affect mental health. In the 20th century, the sadness which now accompanied loneliness was poeticized in literature by the middle-class white male who used it to seek creativity. Yet while solitude granted men creative freedom, women were considered to experience loneliness via abandonment. Queensland poet Mabel Forrest personifies the gendered interpretation of this emotion in her haunting poem, The Lonely Woman, 1909. Where the poet Zora Cross regarded loneliness as a vast, unending landscape, her predecessor Forrest describes claustrophobic, almost horror-like qualities of the emotion. The Lonely Woman tells of rotting bloodwood gates, sullen, stormy sunsets, and everlasting gum trees closing round her like a wall. With each increasingly foreboding verse ending, there a lonely woman waits. In our more recent history, Olympic gold medalist Cathy Freeman is a woman who only waited at the finish line. Renowned worldwide as a powerful, dedicated athlete, Freeman has spoken openly about her struggles with loneliness and depression before and after winning the 400 metres at the Sydney Olympics in 2000. Reflecting on her retirement in a 2004 ABC radio interview, Freeman remarked, I think the greatest amount of pressure is the pressure I place on myself. So in a way, I chose to be alone. Perhaps loneliness and courage sit together more closely than we might first think. So gosh, we've looked at some challenging emotions today, haven't we? I'd like to finish by briefly highlighting one last emotion, but for this one I need your help. This emotion doesn't appear on its own always. We have to conjure it up, but that's precisely where its power lies. Can I please see everybody's biggest and brightest smiles? Even bigger? Looking good. Okay, now can I please have a huge round of applause, and let's see if we can bring this next emotion into the room. Thank you. You did it. A++, an amazing audience. If I may introduce the quiet power of cheerfulness, the quality or state of being noticeably happy or optimistic. And gosh, what a beautiful second definition, the quality of causing happiness. This emotion is special. It's one you can keep in your back pocket and pull out in emergencies. In Cheerfulness, a Literary and Cultural History, Timothy Hampton suggests that cheerfulness is an emotional energy that can raise the spirit for a limited time, a kind of temporary lightness. Hampton notes that unlike happiness or melancholy, cheerfulness is an emotion we can control. We can make ourselves and others cheerful by cheering up, in the same way that we can calm down. In the Book of Human Emotions, Tiffany Watt-Smith notes that by the end of the First World War, thanks to industrialism, a kind of compulsory cheerfulness swept across America, a backdrop against which Dale Carnegie wrote his self-help classic, How to Stop Worrying and Start Living, in 1948. Having previously struggled with loneliness himself, Carnegie suggests that cheerfulness is the key to success, and that even if you're feeling miserable, you should think and act cheerful, and you will be cheerful. Some research, known as the facial feedback hypothesis, even suggests that forcing a smile, as you all expertly did just now, will do just that, make you cheerful. You can let me know later if it worked. Remember these two? This image was taken by a newspaper photographer, and while we have all experienced being forced to smile for the camera, I wonder if this moment of cheerfulness in some small way helped navigate an extremely difficult departure. Reflecting on the history of emotion in our collections gives us an opportunity to consider how and why we may feel a certain way. It sheds new light on our interior worlds and may even challenge deeply held social and cultural belief systems. It has the potential to be a beautiful and engaging way to discover and connect to moments of empathy, inspiration, and courage across time and through space. Thank you for listening, and take care out there.
Well, it's probably a cliche, but what a roller coaster of emotions you've just taken us on, Greer. Fantastic and so interesting. I do want to have a dictionary now with all of those amazing emotions and see if I can drop them into a conversation, make me sound clever, and that will cheer me up. Next up, we have Professor Anna Johnson, who is the 2022 John Oxley Library Honorary Fellow. Anna's project, History and Fiction, Mapping Frontier Violence in Colonial Queensland Writing, explores stories of frontier violence in colonial Queensland. By blending history and fiction, Anna's project aims to uncover untold tales from Queensland's past, giving us a deeper understanding of a crucial part of our history. So get ready for a journey that combines facts and storytelling, shining a light on lesser-known aspects of Queensland's colonial past. Please welcome Anna to the stage.
Thank you very much, and what a hard act to follow. Thanks, Greer. That was a lovely start to our days. So I too want to acknowledge country. This project has been thought about as I've worked on Turrbal and Yagara land, walking between my home in Toowong and the State Library here, and up to the St Lucia campus of University of Queensland. So I too want to acknowledge traditional owners and custodians of the lands on which we meet. And I thought Uncle Steve Cochrane's categorisation of this place as a place of long living and knowledge sharing was really important. This project enabled me to spend wonderful moments reading, thinking, and moving along the Miwah River. The project is about complex and intertwined First Nations and settler histories, and that tried to capture some of the most challenging aspects of colonialism. There are complex and painful histories of violence that sit behind these fictional accounts. I want to assure you that I take this subject very seriously indeed, and do my best to approach it with sensitivity and subtlety. I will take care not to read out loud the most explicit passages of writing that I've encountered. I've carefully selected some images that were produced alongside the fiction because it is through a close engagement with these rich cultural artefacts that we can develop insights into how to take a genuine approach to telling the truth about our shared past. As a non-Indigenous researcher and lecturer, I have a commitment to educating myself about this country, capital C country, that we now share, many people share. For me, that commitment is about reading widely and deeply in diverse sources and paying very close attention to the guidance of First Nations writers, artists, and commentators. It's a commitment that I encourage my own university students to share, and some of them are in the audience here today, I'm delighted to say. In my opinion, it's only by engaging with our history, informing ourselves, and being truthful about the past and its ongoing presence as lived memory that we can hope to build a resilient and well-informed community who can acknowledge complex and contested knowledge about Queensland's history and create new and positive future opportunities. So I invite you to accompany me on a brief version of this larger project today and perhaps consider engaging with me in some future opportunities I plan to explore with the State Library. When the new Governor-General Sir George Gipps arrived in Sydney in early 1838, he carried with him one of the most important British documents designed to influence how settlers engaged with First Nations people, the just published report of the British Parliamentary Select Committee on Aborigines in the British Settlements. This humanitarian-inspired report sought to improve relationships between Indigenous and non-Indigenous people globally, due to the regular and shocking reports of violence and dispossession that flowed back to Britain from its colonies. The Australian colonies were, of course, no exception. Gipps brought a small L liberal determination to improve relationships. While it is highly debatable that his new protection policies improve the conditions of First Nations people, what we can see is that this humanitarian approach inspired writers to record colonial experiences in prose and in poetry, and to explore the complexities of lived experience in fictional forms. Now, almost exactly 1 month after Gipps, the Anglo-Irish poet Eliza Hamilton Dunlop arrived with her family. She was already an ambitious poet, and she found the colonies to be an endless source of inspiration. She imagined 19th century Australia as a distinctly modern society, free from the ideologies of the old world. She wrote, "Hail, Star of the South, Australasia advance with thy soft flowing tresses, thy proud eagle glance, happy homes and free altars, broad lands and bright skies, all are thine, Star of Beauty, arise." But she also did not look away from the challenging aspects of colonialism. Dunlop's The Aboriginal Mother, a poem about the massacre of 30 Wirraway and Gamilaroi men, women and children at Myall Creek on the northern colonial frontier, created a literary sensation in the first year of her arrival in the colony. It commemorated, imagined a woman survivor and her baby after her husband and older child were murdered. It graphically depicted colonial violence in the form of an elegy, a lament. Dunlop's sympathetic representation was published in the Australian newspaper, the same Australian newspaper that we might have been reading this morning, only days before 7 men were publicly hanged for murder in December 1838. A subsequent musical setting by the composer Isaac Nathan led to a public performance in Sydney in 1842. Dunlop's imagined Indigenous narrator directly confronted settlers with their violent acts in the poem's closing lines, to tell of hands, the cruel hands, that piled the fatal pyre, to show our blood on Myob's ridge, our bones on the stockman's fire. Nathan's sheet music reprinted the poem and extracts from the court testimony by named witnesses about the massacre, including details of the violence. His advertisement for the sheet music claimed it ought to be on the pianoforte of every lady in the colony. A really challenging and interesting idea. Now, I've been obsessively researching Dunlop's writing over the past 5 years. As my daughter would tell you, she's been dragged from northern New South Wales to Northern Ireland because I find Dunlop so fascinating as an outspoken critic of the settler colonial world in which she had only just arrived. I've written one book about her already, which is in the bookshop, and plan to write another. So one of my questions when I commenced my John Oxley Honorary Fellowship was whether I could find a Queensland equivalent to Eliza Hamilton Dunlop. Queensland's separation from New South Wales came nearly 20 years later, of course. Historians of the colonial frontier have emphasised that the main after effect of the Myall Creek massacre as the only notable legal prosecution of people for Indigenous massacres in Australia was that reports of violence and dispossession simply went underground and hence unpunished. What would I find in the fiction of the post-1859 period, I wondered. Queensland's late establishment as an independent colony meant that it was imagined in many ways as a fresh start. As one of the British Empire's new colonies in the latter part of the 19th century, Queensland drew international attention. The Queensland magazine boasted, "As Queensland has been set the latest, she is by far the brightest jewel in Queen Victoria's crown." And you could see on that first map the kind of bucolic images that abounded. Grassy headlands overlooking the sea, beautiful birds, slightly odd-looking kangaroos, and peaceful and welcoming First Nations families. Queensland's history since 1859 has provided writers and illustrators with many opportunities to engage the public imagination. Tales of adventure, new opportunities for settler pastoralists and migrants, and depictions of Queensland's beautiful and challenging environments from deserts to shipwrecks, filled newspaper columns. These were what the writer Rolf Boldrewood described as the strange romances which write themselves, often in letters of blood, amid the half-unknown, mysterious regions of tropical Australia. And Boldrewood's ominous image of letters of blood does indeed flow through the history of writing in Queensland. The contemporary author Kate Grenville described her own growing awareness of the complexity of retelling colonial stories when she fictionalised her family history in her award-winning novel, The Secret River, which many of you might have read or seen adaptations of. Grenville wrote about how she gradually realised that when family stories about her ancestor Solomon Wiseman celebrated him for taking up land in the Hawkesbury region, they didn't account for the fact that the land had been in someone else's possession and that violence had ensued. She explains that she crafted her lead character based on her great-great-great-grandfather and took her book's title from W.H. Stanner's 1968 Boyer Lectures, where he says, "A secret river of blood runs through Australian history." Grenville explains he's referring, of course, to the often brutal relationship between Indigenous and non-Indigenous Australians in the past. Grenville defended her choice to pay attention to that complex relationship. She said, "Unless we go back and retell our stories and put the shadows in, we won't grow up as a society." Now, obviously, I share Grenville's view about facing that complex and contested part of our foundational stories, and telling stories based in place here on the Maiwai River mirrors the kind of work that I've been doing myself in the State Library. Where I differ, though, is that when we look at the colonial Queensland newspapers and magazines that I've been flicking through this year, there are not only plenty of shadows, but also very frank and explicit discussion of colonial violence, only lightly cloaked in fictional forms. This image, for example, by the illustrator Ebenezer Murray, accompanied Kyle Feilberg's short story, Attacked by Blacks, published just months after the well-known journalist and newspaper editor had died in 1888. Although the title may suggest a traditional colonial adventure story based on dated stereotypes, It's told by a young romantic adventurer named Charlie, who's travelling with the older and wiser character Macallan, a party of men and a mob of about 10,000 sheep. When they travel beyond the untenanted wilderness, Macallan arms his men but insists that no innocent blood must be shed. He says, "I will not strike the first blow. God knows we white men bring enough evil on the poor creatures. Our presence here is a certain death warrant to them, but I am not going to incur the blood guiltiness of an unprovoked massacre. We must be watchful and patient and not strike unless in self-defence." Others become excited, and when a party of over 100 First Nations men attack them at night, their 3 are killed. Their leader remains wounded but defiant, and he spears a disobedient bushman who dies as he shoots the Aboriginal leader. Robert Orsted Jensen suggests that Feilberg was colonial Queensland's most outstanding advocate for Indigenous Australians when most of his peers were indifferent or hostile. And the historian Henry Reynolds describes Feilberg's pamphlet, The Way We Civilise, from 1880, as one of the most influential political tracts in Australian history. While the location in Feilberg's story is not named after a real place, as far as I can discern, we do know that there was considerable conflict in the area near Thargomindah, which is a close homonym of the fictional setting, Thogoomba. The Kalili descendant Hazel McKellar and the historian Timothy Bottoms both provide evidence that in 1865, the murder of John Jack Dowling on his brother's station at Thargomindah by his servant Pimpili in revenge for a beating set off a chain of reprisal attacks that saw significant loss of Kalili lives. This painting by the artist William Oswald Hodgkinson shows part of the Burke and Wills Relief Party in armed conflict at Bulu, about 100 kilometres from Thargomindah, where the expedition had constructed a stockade in 1860. The drawing was a gift from the artist who had been at Bulu to Miss Eliza Young Husband, beautifully named colonial lady, in 1861, although Hodgkin later married a Queenslander and became the editor of the Rockhampton Morning Bulletin. He also dabbled in fiction. His 1889 story, The Last Chapter, follows a white narrator tracking the Indigenous killers of a prospector at Gilbert River in northern Queensland. As you'd expect from his Bulu painting, in his story, the landscape is a crucial factor. The Queensland landscape itself seems to somehow induce brutality and violence. The white protagonist finds and attacks an Aboriginal camp at dawn with the assistance of 2 Aboriginal men, but eventually his civilised identity is consumed by what is described as the lust of the berserker. These 2 examples reveal some of the kinds of writers that I've identified. Journalists and editors also involved in various kinds of colonial enterprises and who collect stories and remake them as fiction that seeks to explore the murky morality of the frontier situations in which they found themselves. Fiction is, of course, a convenient veil that can shield the brighter light of truth. We can imagine that many readers of the time would have been able to estimate, guess, or imagine real-life experiences of frontier violence that either they had experienced or had been told about. Both of these stories that I've been describing to you certainly question the ethics of violent dispersals of Indigenous people and explore how violence degrades settlers and questions their purported racial superiority. However, these stories are not perfect. First Nations characters are undoubtedly stereotyped. As the Guri novelist Melissa Lukashenko writes about this kind of colonial writing, Aboriginal people have been scrutinised and written about by outsiders in terms both simplistic and racist. They either justified or at best simply refracted racist attitudes about the taking of Aboriginal land and the stealing of Aboriginal lives, labour and freedom. Other writers satirised both the settlers and First Nations people, a little bit of light relief in the middle here. William Charles Wilkes' poem, The Raid of the Aborigines, is perhaps one of the best known accounts of frontier conflict. I know that at least some of my students say that they've been reading this poem in high school, which is really interesting. It fictionalised various aspects of the Battle of Miwa or One Tree Hill, as Ray Kirkove, John Ure and other local historians have explored. The Raid of the Aborigines was published first in 1845, and it predates Queensland's separation from New South Wales. In this mock heroic poem set in the Darling Downs around 1843, settlers are made to look vain and foolish. Indigenous women flatter and distract them, while Indigenous men entrap them using their bush knowledge and defeat them by rolling boulders down the steep hill. Wilkes writes, "In short, it was as plain as the nose on your face that the whites would be found to retreat in disgrace." The resistance leader Multuggerah was named in this poem, alongside a number of other Indigenous and settler figures whose identities were lightly disguised. This poem was regularly reprinted for at least 50 years in the newspapers, often with explanatory notes as to the historical identities behind Wilkes' characters. Ray Kirkove's excellent work shows how Multuggerah brought the resistance efforts of his father, who's characterised in this poem as Old Moppy, to fruition, perpetuating a solid alliance of diverse groups and leading at least 3 victories against the settlers. The later reprints are notable for their illustrations, which I've brought here for you today, which make explicit the satirical portrait of the settlers as kind of hapless Don Quixotes in the rosewood scrub. The multiple fatal reprisals and the ongoing resistance by Multuggerah and his band, however, reveal a much more serious frontier history than the poem acknowledged. But it's still very interesting to me that this poem was so popular, probably the most popular and reprinted poem that I have discovered of this set of writing. The Queensland Native Mounted Police operated for over 50 years, from 1849 until 1904. Although many records were destroyed, recent exceptional research based on archaeological evidence has produced many insights into the history and impact of the paramilitary force and its devastating impact on Indigenous people. Its operations were regularly debated in colonial newspapers, and of course, they also featured in colonial fiction. In these kinds of stories, anonymous Indigenous people and their bodies litter the foreground. They make for devastating reading, and the ubiquity of massacre and the careless disregard for Indigenous lives are palpable. What is emphasised instead in these stories is settler fear and anxiety. Anxiety that their lives are in danger. As Rachel Weaver argues in her broader study of colonial violence in forgotten fiction, 19th century popular short stories address the violence of Aboriginal and settler contact with an almost overwhelming directness and intensity. They show white settlers defending homesteads, huts, camps, stations, livestock and friends or family against Aboriginal attacks, and brutally dispersing, massacring and murdering Aboriginal individuals, families, groups, and in some cases, devastating entire regional populations. But this literary motive of a settler hut under attack, often at night by faceless, nameless First Nations clans, is so common as to have been identified as a distinctive feature of Australian colonial fiction. The graphic violence represented in reprisals against Indigenous groups is seemingly justified in these narratives that often reenact past conflicts in a kind of compulsive retelling. Here I suggest that the fiction veers sharply away from history. Recent estimates by Heather Burke and her team suggest that more than 66,000 Aboriginal people in Queensland were likely to have suffered fatal attacks during the second half of the 19th century, constituting about 25% of the population. By contrast, they find, on average, around 1% of the non-Aboriginal population of that period may have been killed by Aboriginal people. While I otherwise think and deeply believe that fiction can make positive change by allowing readers to imagine the perspectives of others and build empathetic relationships, This deep well of colonial fiction reveals the flip side, that fiction can feed fears and anxieties that are disproportionate to the risk, but nevertheless felt to be real. Across the range of colonial fiction about the Queensland frontier that I've researched, we can find a variety of ideas about colonial society, both progressive and deeply disturbing. I encourage you to look at some of these publications in the White Gloves experience. Consider, when you're touching these volumes of magazines, newspapers and books, their readers in the past. It is, I think, a much more complex picture of Queensland than we might otherwise imagine. These stories were published in popular outlets that were read over breakfast tables, on train stations, and were passed around friends, families, and work colleagues because print was highly valued, and information and entertainment came only through this vehicle. As Melissa Lukashenko argues, such fiction, especially in the era when the novel was about as powerful as Netflix is today, initially served an economic and social as well as a literary purpose. It is certainly confronting to consider how close the colonial frontier and its violent history may be for many of us. I've read memoirs by men such as W.R.O. Hill, reflecting with pride on his time as an officer in the Queensland Mounted Police. His narrative and his photographs show us how socially acceptable and normalised this work was in some parts of society. That troubling history is part of our not-so-distant past, and remembering it may seem uncomfortable and confronting. The material record of it is not only in our libraries, but also in our museums. And First Nation perspectives on frontier violence from the colonial period onwards are also available, such as Oscar's sketchbook by a young Aboriginal man who grew up in Queensland in the 1880s. His drawings appear to present an autobiographical account of his life with Indigenous scenes and cross-cultural contact. More contemporary reflections on the violent Queensland past come from exceptional contemporary artists, such as the Wanyee artist Judy Watson. These visual sources draw on many of the same historical and fictional sources as I have discussed today, and they show us how evidence from colonial archives can be transformed creatively by First Nations practitioners for new purposes. Reading closely and looking carefully are central to our contemporary challenges locally and nationally, I believe. Our First Nations leaders and colleagues are asking non-Indigenous people to take up the challenges of truth-telling about the past in order to progress healing in the present and to shoulder our part of the cultural responsibility for doing so. It is, I think, an exceptional moment in our society, and there are many opportunities to reflect deeply. You may have read or heard David Marr talk about his challenges when he discovered officers who served in the Queensland Native Police in his own family history, which underpins his latest book, Killing for Country. Indeed, one of Marr's ancestors is actually memorialised in that satirical poem, The Raid of the Aborigines, when an Aboriginal woman, quote, with a kangaroo spear, had sadly annoyed Billy Ewer in the rear. It's not very good poetry, I have to tell you. David Marr, at his launch in Brisbane, talked about how he felt ashamed of his family's involvement in colonial violence, but not responsible for it himself. I saw his Brisbane family members sink a little low in their seats as his talk proceeded, despite David's marvellous skills as a speaker. I think we can imagine how complicated it is to take account of these colonial histories, their intimacy and their violence, and the deep consideration they demand of it. I've done some of this work while walking the Maiwar River, reading and thinking about the records in the State Library, listening to some of the terrific recent podcasts about Queensland histories and frontier conflict. But there's more work that I want to do. If you too are interested in considering these complex histories and reading the fiction that fascinated our ancestors, please keep an eye out for a reading group that I'm hoping to run with the State Library in 2024. Thank you very much for your time and attention.
Thank you so much, Anna, for that very thought-provoking and disturbing in many ways discussion of the literature in Queensland's history and how that obviously reflect current opinions. Lots of food for thought there. Well, our next speaker is Mary Howes, the 2022 Queensland Business Leaders Hall of Fame Fellow. This fellowship was supported by QUT and the Queensland Library Foundation and is now enabled through the generous support of the John Allpass Charitable Foundation and documents Queensland's business and economic history. If you've been a long-time resident of Brisbane, Tritton's Furniture is likely to hold nostalgic memories with its flagship store on George Street near Adelaide Street. Indeed, my uncle was an upholsterer for Tritton's back in the 40s, I believe. Mary's year-long research has delved into the fascinating story of this successful Queensland furniture business founded by the multifaceted Fred Tritton in 1886. And today we are privileged to have Fred's grandson, Ken Tritton, with us and his family in our audience. Just put your hand up, Ken, so we know where you are. Hi, welcome. Great to have you here today. And that, of course, adds a very special emotional resonance to the event. So please welcome Mary to the stage.
Okay, thank you, Jenny. Welcome, everybody. First of all, I'd like to start by acknowledging the traditional owners, the Turrbal and Jagera peoples, their elders past, present and emerging. I'd like to thank the Queensland Library Foundation and the Queensland Institute of Technology Business School for awarding me this fellowship and the opportunity to unearth the history of one of our most important manufacturing companies, F. Tritton Furniture. And thank you also to my editor, Annika Howes. So just to set the scene, next time you look across the river from the State Library or the gallery, just take a note of the very tall building with the multicoloured facade that's the Brisbane Library sits in these days. That was the site of Tritton's flagship store from 1889 to 1986. Fred Tritton was ahead of his time in business establishment, marketing and sustainability. He engendered an excellent work ethic within his staff, ensuring the business's longevity. He regularly travelled overseas with his wife Eliza to bring the latest trends in furniture, home decor, to Queensland, ensuring his clients had the best. After his death in 1947, his sons Roy and Cyril carried on the business, and then Roy's son Ken, welcome Ken, carried on the store in Nambour until his retirement in 1997. So since commencing this project, many Queenslanders have told me that they have owned at least one piece of Tritton's furniture, or their family members have. So this, and many others have had relatives working for Tritton's, as Jenny just mentioned. So this presentation will give you an overview of Tritton's while showcasing the extensive collection of Tritton's ephemera in the State Library collection, some of which you'll be able to see during the lunch break as part of the White Gloves experience. Establishing the business. The Tritton family arrived in Brisbane aboard the SS Sursa in 1884. There were William and Sarah and their 4 sons. At that point, Charles was 20, Frederick 18, Joseph 16 and John 8. So obviously this is a much later photo. Fred had some experience in the furniture business in England, and so he wanted to pursue that trade rather than farming, which was kind of expected of new settlers at that time. So in 1886, the elder 2 brothers, Fred and Charles, started up a second-hand furniture shop in Woolloongabba. They both married in 1889 and dissolved that partnership, and Fred and his new wife, Eliza, carried on the business from a small shop in Logan Road. I was so excited to find this image in the State Library hard copy collection because it shows the name Tritton on the awning of the little shop there, which I'm hoping you can read. It's quite tiny, but I guess one important point I'd like to make here is that researchers need to consider the fact that not all of the State Library photos have been digitised. Sometimes you have to go looking in the hard copy collection, and that's where I found this little gem. In mid-1896, Fred moved the business around the corner into Stanley Street opposite the railway yard, so that's going to be a new station in the Cross River Rail pretty soon. This larger store allowed for a diversification in stock. Tritton's became a homewares and furniture store and advertised that it could furnish anything from a two-room cottage to a mansion. In 1889, they leased a new warehouse and showrooms, it was referred to as that point, in George Street. Then the Woolloongabba store remained in the family and it was rebranded as Coupon Furniture. So everyone will probably remember Coupon as well, which was also owned by the Tritton family. Fred believed in advertising. From 1902, he featured heavily in the classifieds of both the Brisbane Courier and the Telegraph, as did Fred's brother Joseph Walter, who also had a little shop. So that's why the business became F. Tritton, because J.W. Tritton, his brother, was kind of in competition with him. So you always will see his business as F. Tritton. In 1905, they published their first illustrated catalogue, and that was promoted through statewide newspaper advertising, offering delivery anywhere in Queensland. A new factory in Russell Street was completed in 1908, and that is the site of the new QPAC Playhouse currently under construction in Russell Street. The factory was described as the best equipped plant in Queensland and employed its own artists to design furniture. In April 1909, Fred and his wife Eliza embarked on the first of many overseas fact-finding tours. And Fred also promoted the excellent working conditions in Australia in an attempt to attract more skilled migrants. Fred and Eliza had 6 children between 1890 and 1910. The businesses were registered then, Coupon in 1914 and F. Tritton in 1915. In 1917, Fred was able to purchase the George Street site, and then he began acquiring adjacent land parcels, particularly land facing North Quay. Trittons had expanded their range of locally made and imported goods, providing everything a new homeowner could need in one place, the right place. The right place became their slogan from 1903. Sadly, the Tritton family did not escape the 1919 influenza pandemic, which caused the deaths of around 21 million people worldwide. The 2 eldest Trittons died, 26-year-old Lillian in September and 29-year-old Charles on Christmas Eve. And sadly, Charles left behind a young son and a wife expecting their second child. The 1920s provided consolidation and expansion of the business. Trittons began building on North Quay to this lovely design by Atkinson and Conrad. But then Brisbane City Council were trying to resume their property in an effort to extend Adelaide Street through to North Quay. So Adelaide Street did not go through until 1975. That's hard to comprehend these days. Family spirits were lifted with the 1921 marriage of daughter Ivy to Sydney-trained architect Ashley Shaw, and it was very useful to have an architect in the family when you're an empire builder. So Ashley Shaw designed all the Trittons building after he became registered to practice in Queensland in 1927, and some houses for family members. So during the 1920s, Trittons secured a number of important furnishing contracts, including the new Winter Garden Theatre in Queen Street. In 1926, Fred, Eliza, daughter Ivy and Ashley Shaw toured the UK and North America. In 1927, Fred and Eliza visited northern and western Queensland. networking with their clients. So they had a very personal touch. They wanted to find out what the requirements of their clients were in the much harsher climates of northern and western Queensland. They visited Tattersall's Hotel in Longreach and the Wintergarten Theatre in Townsville, both of which had been furnished by Trittons. Fred was a supporter of the Queensland Preference League. Now, this was an organisation established in 1927 which promoted the sale of Queensland-made goods. He hosted furniture displays in his store and tours of his South Brisbane factory to show that Queensland could produce quality products at a competitive price. The Factories and Shop Act Amendment Bill 1916 required furniture to be stamped indicating that European labour was used in its manufacture. In 1928, Fred again visited Europe and Scandinavia. He claimed that through his personal efforts in sourcing the newest ideas, the best methods of production, he manufactured soundly constructed, artistically designed and internationally styled furniture for his Queensland clients. Fred Tritton's commitment to excellence was recognised with gold medals in the Royal National Shows of 1928 and 1929. Tritton's gold medal furniture became the company's hallmark from that time on, and that gold medal is from a wardrobe that's still in my family, that was in my room as a small child, so unbelievable. Sustainability. Fred Tritton had been enlightened to the need of forest conservation during his 1926 American trip. In Oregon, every felled tree was replaced with a new seedling, and both Canada and New Zealand had large reforestation projects. Newspaper reporting of the Queensland's Provisional Forestry Board, provisional board at this point to manage our forests, so there wasn't a lot of focus on that, unfortunately, and the newspapers suggested that our forests were being massacred. Future timber supplies were not being managed, and that threatened the sustainability of Tritton's business, along with our building industry in general. Fred Tritton also argued that men employed in the often meaningless relief work tasks that men were given during the Depression to earn a basic little bit of money for their family, he said they'd be better off planting trees because that was going to be much more useful for the future of Queensland and guarantee our future timber supplies. Advertising. Fred had always utilised the power of advertising. But advertising as an industry did not really exist at this time. In May 1931, the Institute of Publicity was formed. Its vice president, John Richard Churchill, was advertising manager for Trittons. Churchill produced a feature film. It promoted the business and its achievements over time, and it was screened at the Melba Theatre in Fortitude Valley in 1933, The Story of the Right Place, with a personal introduction of Fred Tritton, of course. The following year, the song The Right Place was released with sheet music written by Meta McLean and available from Tritton's stores or by mail. So he was very much into his advertising and promotion. So then we roll into the Depression era, and you would think that things might have been bad, but Tritton's just continued to do really well. Son-in-law Ashley Shaw designed major extensions to both Coupon and Tritton's George Street store, built during 1934. 1934, Tritton's had 150 employees, and that was an increase of 20 employees over the previous 3 years, which was still the tail end of the Depression. And he purchased new land at West End, up near the West End State School, for a furniture factory. So he remained confident of his position in Queensland. Supporting the arts. Fred Tritton's furniture business focused on creating beauty in the homes of Queenslanders. He employed artists, craftsmen, and he was an advocate for the arts. Eliza was president of the Brisbane Women's Club from 1930, and that club supported the Queensland Art Fund, established in 1927 by Vida Leigh and sculptor Daphne Mayo. Fred supported the fundraising associated with the Darnell bequest, which raised funds from businessmen towards the establishment of a national picture gallery. And concurrently, of course, he devoted the top floor of his new shop space to an art gallery. So while he did exhibit local artists, he also displayed Italian works that he'd procured on one of his overseas trips, along with a plethora of imported goods that people could purchase to decorate their homes. So the new factory in West End was built during 1936. I think it started production early in 1937. And the Brisbane City Council stated that this factory was one of the most important buildings in Queensland of the year. Once operations began at West End, the Russell Street factory became a bulk store. During World War II, there were obvious shortages of materials and staff, but they pushed on. The Queensland State Advances Corporation, which later was renamed as the Housing Commission, it began its post-war construction program in 1943, so they obviously were optimistic about the war ending soon, and they intended to build 1,000 new homes annually. A meeting of the Trades and Labour Council in 1944 suggested that the cost of furniture should be included in a housing loan. Sadly, that's never happened. But Trittons were asked to provide an estimate for the cost of furnishing a 2-bedroom workers' dwelling, and they estimated it could be done for £109, 19 shillings and 8pence. So the war ended in August 1945. Fred Tritton's youngest daughter, Nell, there's a whole other story about Nell, who was married to the Russian premier and spent the war years trying to outrun the Nazis. And I don't have time to go into her life here. Sadly, she died at quite a young age in 1946 in Brisbane, back home with her parents. Fred was devastated at the death of his third adult offspring, and 11 months later he suffered a stroke and died at home. He had left instructions with the directors that every staff member, apart from the executives, were to receive the equivalent of 1 week's wages on the event of his death, in appreciation of their loyalty and honest endeavours to make the business a success. Fred Tritton was remembered as one of Queensland's most successful entrepreneurs, having created one of the largest furniture businesses in Australia. And despite the loss of their founder and governing director, the company boomed in the post-war era. His son Roy became managing director and son Cyril managed Coupon Furniture. Post-war development. The post-war housing crisis was not dissimilar to what we're currently experiencing, and it meant many people were living in Housing Commission huts in camps, comprising huts that are left over from the war, so old Army and Air Force huts. So that aerial photo is Victoria Park, and I think you should be able to see the plethora of little tiny huts all around, and that was just one such camp. There was another at Holland Park and another one at Camp Muckley at Archerfield. Brisbane City Council was struggling to provide the infrastructure supporting the annual approval of 5,000 new homes. So that's 5 times as many as what the Housing Commission thought was going to happen. By 1949, it was reported that Trittons had a backlog of furniture in storage destined for the Housing Commission, and while I spent many days looking through State Archives files trying to find some details about this, I was unable to. Nevertheless, this photo of an interior of a Housing Commission rental in Holland Park just popped up on their Facebook page quite recently, and I can only assume that that's the kind of furniture that they were supplying. So as well as increased immigration, there was a post-war baby boom. Life was rapidly changing, people were optimistic for the future, and Trittons could provide everything you required for your new home. Continuing their prominence in advertising, in 1948, Trittons employed LG Burley signs to erect a large neon sign on the top of Trades Hall in Edward Street. It dominated the street at the time of the 1954 parade honouring the recently crowned Queen Elizabeth and Prince Philip. Eliza Tritton was one of 5 local women chosen to be presented to the Queen at a ceremony in City Hall, honouring her charitable works, including the founding of what we now know as St Luke's Nursing Service. In 1958, Trittons were stocking up for the introduction of television, displaying television sets in the George Street window. And once broadcasting began in 1959, August 1959, customers gathered round the shop windows to see these new devices. And that was the standard practice for many years because televisions were extremely expensive and the only way to see them was in shop windows. So the ongoing entrepreneurship of the Suns is demonstrated by the expansion into suburban shops. First of all, Roy Tritton purchased a store in Southport that became Trittons. Then they established a new manufacturing venture known as Trend Furniture in Salisbury, then a further store in Nambour. They then moved into Garden City 1970, Chermside 1971, later Arndale at Sunnybank, and similarly Coupon expanded into the Big Top Shopping Centre at Upper Mount Gravatt and Stafford Road, Everton Park, while the George Street premises remained their flagship store. Trittons adopted a new logo from the mid-1970s, which was used on their advertising, such as railway bridges. Publicity staff thought news coverage of a truck stuck under a railway bridge was just free advertising for Trittons. Another method of saturation advertising was employed from the 40s, and that was advertising on the back of bus and tram tickets, and that continued through to the late 70s. So the Russell Street bulk store, or the original factory, was inundated in the 74 flood and all the stock was destroyed. It was purchased by Brisbane City Council initially as parkland, but very quickly became the site for Expo, and the Canadian Pavilion was on the site of the Trittons bulk store, and now the new Performing Arts Centre is being built on that site opposite the ABC studios. Where are we up to? In November 1975, as I said earlier, Adelaide Street was finally extended through to North Quay. That allowed for the construction of a restaurant with a glazed awning roof all along the Adelaide Street facade. That was designed by architect Robin Gibson, who designed the original section of the State Library, which is across there, the Museum, Art Gallery and Performing Arts Complex. And this was another example of forward thinking by Ken Tritton. It was the first step towards al fresco dining in Brisbane. This was the late 70s when this was built. Al fresco dining was illegal in Queensland at the time. So good on you, Ken, for starting another trend. The end of an era. Following the deaths of many family members between 1968 and 1979, starting with Eliza, who lived to the ripe old age of 97, a joint decision was made between remaining family members and the board, which led to the closure of F. Tritton's Furniture in the early 1980s. Ken Tritton registered his own business in October 1980 and continued to manage the Nambour store, later buying it. All of the Tritton's properties were sold to SGIO, which later became Suncorp in 1981. The contract on the George Street store was signed on the 25th of May and the closing down sales started the same day. The George Street store was demolished between June and October 1986, a century after Fred and Charles Tritton established their little second-hand shop in Woolloongabba. And you might notice the State Library still under construction in that photo in the foreground. So while the business no longer exists, the furniture does. Many furniture restorers proudly offer their renewed Tritton's pieces for sale on various online marketplaces, and Tritton's is known for its quality furniture, and people always attribute the quality to the pieces they're still selling online. Many owners have retained the dockets or tickets associated with their items to prove their provenance. Now, there are a couple of excellent Tritton's furnishing projects which can still be seen in Queensland, one of which is the Hotel Coronis in Charleville. The current owners are embracing its furnishings heritage. They've been retrieving old items from storage and they're doing up some bedrooms into lovely themed bedrooms. and the owners have stated that the furniture is of such good quality, they just have to dust it and rub it down with beeswax and it looks fabulous. Another property which still contains Tritton's furnishings is Avalon Flats in New Farm. Avalon had been home to many artists over time, and their works were subject of an exhibition at the Museum of Brisbane in 2005 and the accompanying published book, which you can see in the White Gloves display a little bit later. So that building is on the Brisbane City Heritage Register. There are a number of homes associated with the Tritton family, the extended family, also on state and local heritage registers. So the one at the top there at East Brisbane, S Grove, that was the home of Fred Tritton's brother Joseph. He had a grandson called Fred Tritton. I thought I should explain this here because there's a lake in Richmond called Lake Fred Tritton, which is a different Fred Tritton from the one I'm researching, but still the same family. So I thought I should clarify that. The lovely Tudor-style house at the top there, that was designed by Ashley Shaw, and that was Cyril's home in Clayfield. And the next one down is known as Eastwood in Vulture Street, and that was designed by Robin Dodds, and that was the home of John Tritton. So Fred Tritton's success may be attributed to his devotion to his business. He aimed to provide the best new furniture, both imported and locally produced, for his Queensland customers. He was an advocate for forest conservation. He supported the arts and successfully used advertising to grow his business at a time when advertising was becoming a business of its own. Tritton's furniture prospered during the Depression when others fell by the wayside. And following his death, sons Roy and Cyril expanded the retail component into the new suburban drive-in shopping centres, and they began a new manufacturing venture. The stores operated through to the early 1980s, with grandson Ken continuing Nambour until 1997. So Trittons truly have furnished Queensland. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Mary. What a fascinating history of a name that we all know and love for such a long period of time. I'd now like to invite Greer and Anna to join us up on stage here because it's time for your questions. And just a reminder while we get organised and Greer and Anna come up on stage, do join us now, about Slido. So what you have to do is just point the camera in your phone up to that. That will then pop up a little yellow box. Click on the yellow box and you can ask your questions through Slido and they pop up like magic on this screen in front of me here. So we may not have time to get through all the questions, but we'll certainly try and do as many as we possibly can. So I'm going to move over here. And ladies, if you all just make sure you pull your microphone in front of you and then we'll be able to hear you. So, just a reminder too, folks, I'm just allowing some people who are just leaving up the top there. We'll just give them a moment to clear. But just a reminder that if you have some reflections about today's proceedings, you can always pop it up on your social media, and the hashtag that we're using is SLQ, Research Reveals, and that Research Reveals, that's all one word, and use that on any of your favourite social media platforms. Now, it looks like we have a couple of questions up already, so let's start with this one. Okay, we'll start with you, perhaps. Greer, did the research process reveal any other interesting areas of research that you'd like to delve into?
Yes, it definitely did. It was difficult.
Just
because,
pull your mic a little bit closer. That's right.
Because everything I found was so interesting. I wanted to read whole books around every single thing that I found, every story, like even Where the Wild Things Are. Now I could do a whole project on Maurice Sendak, for example, or the little dog that was jumping that comes from a beautiful collection, an interesting photographer. Seems like there's a love story there The poet Zora Cross got her own incredible story. There's a great book called The Shelf Life of Zora Cross by Kathy Perkins. So I really did a deep dive on that and then had to get back on topic. But yeah, so absolutely, yeah.
And Anna, you were mentioning that you've already got ideas for things where you're going to delve into new projects. But first of all, what's the name of the book that you've already written?
Oh, the Eliza Hamilton Dunlop one is called Writing from the Colonial Frontier.
Right, and is that available in the library shop?
It is indeed
It is indeed available in the
shop.
library shop. And remember, a cheeky 10% discount available if you go shopping today.
Thank you very much, Jenny.
So you have another idea that you're going to delve into?
I do. I mean, as you could tell from some of the discussions, some of these stories I don't think a lot of people would want to read, but some of them I think would really bear rereading and thinking about. And so I'm really interested in, I've had a group of students work with me on this project over the last couple of years. So I've had 4 students reading these stories and thinking about how they might be able to use this information in their own research and writing at university. But we'd really like to open that up to a broader community as well, and think about some reading groups in which we might read some of the 19th century writing and perhaps some of the contemporary writing as well that helps to contextualise that. And it's challenging reading, but I think it's really important, and I think there's such a depth of fascination in our history. And I put up there Melissa Lukashenko's new book, Eden Glassy, which many people might have read over Christmas, which is a First Nations reimagining of early colonial history in Brisbane. And I think that kind of writing is really extraordinary when we read about our local places and see it through different eyes. I'm teaching it to my students this semester.
I'm sure there are lots of people who've read David Marr's book too.
Exactly,
Yes.
yeah.
And what about you, Mary? Where are you heading next?
I haven't. Well, my problem with this project had been there was so much to reduce it down to something manageable, because there's just so much to find about Tritton. So yeah, I haven't got any great vision of where to head next with it, although my husband and I have been doing upcycling of old furniture since COVID hit, and I've studiously avoided doing any Tritton stuff because it's really good quality. We've been doing stuff destined for the tip. But yes, this is where I've noticed how many beautiful Tritton pieces are coming up for sale, and they're still in beautiful condition. So always part of Queensland's home history, isn't it? Yeah.
It is. And I mean, obviously we have members of the Tritton family here. Did you incorporate interviews with them into your research?
No formal ones, but I went to Ken's house a number of times, and that's where a lot of the photos have come from and the information about more recent times. Thank you, Ken, to pull that all together. So, yeah.
So a question here for Greer. People are wondering, is the search engine available already that we can use emotions, or is that something that's still in development?
It's still coming, yeah.
It's still coming,
yeah,
okay.
It will be, that's the next stage. I've just been gathering all of the information before deciding. I mean, there are various drafts of it right now,
Yes.
but it will be ifeelyou.com.au,
Right.
ready later in the year.
Okay. And there's a question here from Bianca saying, could each of you describe a typical day or week in the archives for your fellowship? How did you plan the project and the process? I think this could be a very long answer from each of you. So perhaps just a quick sort of short version of where did you start the project? What was the first thing that you did?
Look, I have to say I was very lucky because I'd had a UQ summer research student who had come and identified a range of resources for me and put them into a beautiful database. Brianna just did amazing work one summer for me. So I came in and I ordered in these fascinating artefacts that had been pre-identified for me, and then, like a detective, I followed my nose. I found little rabbit holes to dive down, trying to work out whether the fiction was based on historical events, trying to work out how writers were connected to each other, and ordered in material and got lost in it. So that's the story of my year.
Where was your starting point, Greer?
I went for images first because I felt that that was the easiest way to go about things, and just largely dividing them into disagreeable and agreeable emotions, and then going from there very, very widely, and at the same time just doing a lot of background reading on emotion in general and then specific emotions, and then just same thing, following my nose and going through everything.
I think the audience are just getting clues for what they would do if they were researching
Yes.
a project. And for you, Mary, why did you choose Trittons? I mean, there are so many famous sort of department stores that were in Brisbane, Quertas, Allen and Star. I mean, why did you
It's
hone
a
in on
long
Trittons?
story in that I was actually hosting the Ann Street tours of Brisbane for Brisbane Open House, and we visited the Masonic Lodge, where the person guiding us through there casually mentioned that it was furnished by Triton's Furniture, and I said, I think you might find that's Triton's. But having said that, I went home and started doing some research on Trove, and the more the research I did, the more fascinated I became. But I could never get anyone from the Masonic Lodge to allow me to look at their archives. So I don't actually know if that's true or not. But nevertheless, that's what got me started. And so, yeah, my starting point was Trove, because that sort of showed me the diversity of the company and kind of the inroads into the advertising industry and the sustainability of timber, and so many side tracks I could have gone down. But as Greer said, started with the photographs, of which I found lots in the hard copy collection. And I also went to other places like the Fryer Library and the State Archives to complement my research material, and of course to the family. So yeah, a good historian, I go to lots of different places to pull it all together. Yeah.
So I think this question will be for you, Anna. Can you identify any particularities with the frontier wars in Queensland compared to other states in Australia or even overseas?
Look, I think the frontier wars were really specific in Queensland. They were later, and so in many ways people knew what they were doing. They had experienced frontier conflict previously, and you think about the map of settlement, a lot of that settlement came up through that kind of Mile Creek area from the 1830s
That's
onwards.
around Dalby and Mile Creek, isn't it?
Yeah, nearby Warrialda is the closest, so it's just in northern New South Wales there. So, you know, you could see those kinds of patterns of settlement and dispersal. And the Queensland Native Police, of course, were a very distinctive part of frontier wars, brought in to calm down particular areas, a paramilitary force which mirrored actually paramilitary forces in other parts of Australia, but also overseas. So the British Empire had early learnt that these kinds of quasi-official but officially separate groups were very good at clearing land because they were operating outside of usual legal restrictions. Henry Reynolds, of course, has done extraordinary work about frontier violence in Queensland, but there's a whole new generation of really wonderful histories, some of whom I mentioned in my talk, Ray Kirkhove, Timothy Bottoms, Jonathan Richards, and of course the amazing work that a number of people have done at the University of Newcastle with the Colonial Frontier Massacres map, where we can actually go into an online source and see where those, see on the map where those massacres and frontier wars took place and the kinds of resources that underpin our knowledge of those skirmishes. So it's a very rich area. It's a troubling area to think about, but I think, you know, we're kind of... the fact that there's so much evidence of it in the 19th century shows that this wasn't a secret at the time, so it shouldn't be a secret now either.
I mean, Australia had a fairly brutal start with the convict history and obviously the way that the convicts were treated. Do you think that that was an extension of the original way that people were settled here?
Oftentimes, I think, Jenny, yes. And I mean, Kate Grenville is a really interesting example there because she talks about how her ancestor, Solomon Wiseman, had come out as a convict and then freed himself from that pretty brutalising experience and then took up land. And you have to think that a lot of people had suffered hardship and saw this as a land of opportunity, but didn't think at whose cost that opportunity came.
Okay, so we'll move on to our next question, and this one looks like it's for you, Greer. What are your thoughts about subjectivity in the interpretation of emotions in photographs?
I think it's very complicated. There are so many different ways that you could look at and understand a photograph, and the emotion might not only be what the image is representing, but the photographer or how it was kept, or there could be some other story behind that. But an example is the image that I had of the beautiful sunset in the clouds. It was sort of pinky when I was talking about Adam Lindsay Gordon's poem. I had originally put that image into a calming sort of emotion and agreeable. And after I read his poem about sunlight on the sea, I was like, oh, that image is actually really sad. So my perspective of it changed. And Katie Barclay, a historian of emotion, talks about what the researcher themselves puts on to the image too. So there's a lot of different ways to look at it, I think.
And I guess, you know, for all of you, you're all looking at images and having an emotional response to them and thinking, you know, does this serve the purpose of my research and what I'm doing? So I guess everybody's having an emotional response, not just the project that you were working on, Greer.
Yeah.
So I think we've probably only got time for one more question. So a couple of people are wondering, let me pick this. Oh, look, I've got a 5-minute warning too. It's coming up. Okay. So, Mary, to you, what are the lessons you think that modern businesses could learn from Fred Tritton? Because he was obviously a very astute man.
Absolutely. I think it's just a different era now too. I'm not sure that we can ever go back there because now we have like an international trading economy these days. We're not just focused on what we do here or what we make here. Everything's internationally geared, so I'm not sure that we could go back to that. But nevertheless, he certainly engendered that sense of belonging to the company, and I think a lot of companies try and do that now, but I'm not sure that they're genuine, dare I say. I think perhaps his genuineness is what shone through, as opposed to let's go on a love-in weekend and we can all say how wonderful we are.
Yes, I mean, giving everybody an extra week's wages.
Yes, something like that. I can't
pretty
imagine
amazing,
that
isn't
ever
it?
happening
Yes.
now. Do you want me to respond to the next question about European labour?
Yes.
Yes,
So there was another question here about European labour only. What did that actually mean? What was the difference between that and Australian made?
Because we considered ourselves to be British subjects back then. So we were still part of Britain in terms of our psyche. And sadly, reading between the lines of that legislation was to cut out the Chinese furniture makers. There was a huge number of Chinese furniture makers in Fortitude Valley area. And we had so many racist policies, including our White Australia policy back then. But, you know, nevertheless, it was I don't know if it was in every state in Australia, but certainly they were all promoting getting people to buy their locally made furniture as long as it wasn't made by the Chinese, sadly. Now everything's made by the Chinese, so we've come full circle, haven't we?
And our final question from Abby, for Greer, how and where can she find, and indeed I'm sure many of us, more about those non-English terms for emotions that you discovered? Is there a resource that we could go to?
There's a fantastic book called The Book of Human Emotions by
The Book of Human
The
Emotions.
Book of Human Emotions by Tiffany Watt-Smith. It's sort of a dictionary. It's really a dictionary of emotions with really good short snapshots of that emotion across time. So good. And then there's a lot of beautiful, after you've done a deep dive on that, then you can find the larger reference books covering entire emotions on their own. But that's been my Bible for the last year.
Interesting. So just tell us the name again.
The Book of Human Emotions by Tiffany Watt-Smith.
Tiffany Watt-Smith. fascinating. I will be looking for that myself. It's really interesting. Thank you, everybody, for your great questions. So, just a reminder about the White Gloves experience, which is being held upstairs. So, if you're interested, you just have to join one of the groups. There'll be groups of about 40 people per session, and the sessions go for 20 minutes. So, plenty of time to get some lunch as well. There's lots of great cafes here, and of course, there's a Woolworths Metro across the road, there's a Starbucks near the train station, so lots of options around. We're all going to reconvene here back at 2 o'clock, so that gives you plenty of time. And thank you for your attendance this morning, and don't miss this afternoon. You've seen already how fascinating this is, and we've got a fabulous afternoon ahead as well. So we'll see you at 2 o'clock.